Hi, this is Alexandra Kitty, and welcome to the Clue IQ Chronicles, Crime Code and Clues, Episode 0. So I'm your hostess for this wild ride, and I'm glad to be back to podcasting. I haven't done this in a couple of years, went away to do other things, and now I'm back. So this episode is a starter of sorts, and I'm going to talk a lot about what brings a true crime writer and a true crime researcher to the world of AI games and how I got to where I am now. Because I wrote 21 books. I'm a kintsugi artist. I used to teach kintsugi, a college professor, scholar, all sorts of things. None of them which screamed starting an AI VR-based gaming company. So how this all began is a couple of years ago, stumbled on a job that I absolutely loved. It lasted 3 seasons till the show was canceled, and it's called A Time to Kill. And I came on as the true crime researcher, did 8 episodes over 3 seasons, and I thought, this is great. I could actually start a television production company doing this. But then TV went where it went, and I thought, what is the number one gaming medium, entertainment medium? And it was gaming. So I said, well, we mostly do fiction and gaming. Why not nonfiction? What I have to do, how I do this, I emphasize ethics and empathy and trying to help people finding information. And I thought this is probably an untapped market for documentaries. So instead of thinking of it as a game, more as an immersive documentary experience with interactive elements. So let me tell you a little bit about myself if you don't know me. I am Alexandra Kitty. I have an extensive true crime background. Besides working on A Time to Kill, I've written a true crime book, won an award, called Murder in the Sundown Town, The Murder of Carol Jenkins, published by Genius Publishing in 2023. This June, I had another book come out. It was a textbook called Narrative Criminology, and it was how to do this sort of work, true crime research, with integrity and ethics. I have an extensive journalism background, wrote numerous books. So if you know my name, you usually know it from Don't Believe It, How Lies Become News, or Outfoxed, Rupert Murdoch's Roar, and on journalism. I've also written fiction, many short stories. I also wrote a short story anthology called Consumerisms in 12 Easy Steps. I've written about a lot of things, from hospital trains in the Second World War to Sherlock Holmes in the theater to kintsugi. You name it. If I was, an obscure topic out there that gains my interest, it usually came out as a book. And Presidents in Golf. So also The Sport of Presidents, The History of U.S. Presidents in Golf is another book I wrote. So I wrote a lot of interesting books and not mainstream, because I always like to do my own thing. But then after I wrote book 20, and I thought, you know what? You can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. So I want to do something different. I've taught, I've been an artist, I've been everywhere, man. Me and Johnny Cash, right up there. One thing I didn't do was gaming. But it's not like I didn't have the background. My undergraduate thesis when I was a psychology student was in psychoacoustics, but I also, way before all the cool kids were doing it, I took a class in artificial intelligence, and I even made my own program on how to use phobia as the background, training programming, so they would learn to avoid malware. So that was something I fool around with. I didn't think it was going to actually come full circle and be a part of my job. So here's all these interesting things I've done over the years. And then when I started planning out how I wanted to do a company came book 21, which was narrative criminology. And I said, okay, that's my encore, and that's all I want to do book-wise. Books are nice. I agree with them, but I like to look at the future. I'm a person of tomorrow. And we haven't really actually mined technology the way we think we have. And this is where I wanted to go. So I've done everything from teach kintsugi to popular culture to research and reporting, all sorts of communications. And I'm not much on static. Let's remember all these rules and follow them dutifully. I like to challenge things, turn rules over until they break. And this is where I've come. So Clue IQ started as a television production company. Lots of close calls, near misses, but always there was something in the way. It didn't matter if it was an actor's strike of a couple of years ago, or a company or a VC that went under just as I was about to progress. And I realized this is the problem with TV. yesterday's media. And if you're thinking about the future, you have to think about tomorrow. So I did. And I said, what's the problem with television? Because I wrote books, journalism critique books. That's what I'm mostly known for. And Clue IQ came from that idea that social media broke the gatekeepers because it was the first time people could interact and they could bypass a gatekeeper. Before, if journalists didn't care about you or didn't like you, they didn't have to report about you. They didn't have to give you a platform. They could ignore you. They could write about you any way they wanted. And that's what's stuck. But then they thought, well, if we control the information flow, that's what people are going to think, what we tell them. And that's not true. What social media did was it uncovered the truth that you cannot change how people think. If they have an opinion, whether, authority imposes it or not. What they believe is what they're going to believe. And you cannot, on the long term, change people's minds. You can only go with the flow, what I call organic plurality. We have a whole bunch of different viewpoints, and you can act like an authoritarian all you want. If what you do doesn't work for people, they're going to feel it. You might not give them a platform to speak, but they're going to think it. Doesn't matter. So knowing this and knowing that social media showed this truth, I thought the problem with communications for decades, centuries even, if you're adding print to this mix, is it was always one way. You couldn't really immerse yourself or interact with information. And I thought that's not necessary. I mean, people think they interact with comments on a news article, but it can go deeper than that, and it can be more meaningful. And now people talk about AI this, AI that. And I'll admit, when I first, thought about it, I thought, well, there's a lot of problems with AI. And this is somebody who did her undergraduate work in AI. But then I said, yeah, you can misuse a hammer and hit somebody, but then also you can build a castle with it. It's what you do with it. And once I started to reintroduce myself deeply into AI, I said, there's a lot of possibilities here. You can do a lot, especially if you're creative. If you're a true creative, you're not intimidated by AI. You're not afraid it's going to get rid of your job. You're going to go, how can I make this tool, this collaborator, this partner work for you? Because it's not like a search engine. It does reflect how you input words into it. That's absolutely true. But the more you use it, the more it understands you, the more you can interact with it in a meaningful way to glean empirical insights, not just empirical ones. You can look through emotional and a primal lens with it, unlike anything else we've ever had before. So it's a powerful portal that we have never had before. And I said, I'm not going to be one of these people who is going to be reactionary. What we did decades ago is superior. Well, no, times change, people change, we change. We do fall back onto bad habits out of fear. But if we're very cognizant of how we behave and how we think, we can get over it. So Clue IQ was basically my musings of the future and why nonfiction is floundering. Nonfiction's floundering because it's not interactive. And once I started realizing television, radio, the medium, print, they baked into journalism this idea that you tell people what to think and how to think about it. And this is why it floundered, and chronicled this in my books over the years. You can't force people into something that's unnatural for a prolonged period of time. And I've written about propaganda as well. Mind Under Siege, Mechanisms of War Propaganda was a book I wrote that was published in 2020. And that took me a couple of decades to research on my own, empirically, through my method research. And if you know me, you know that I believe in immersing myself in a topic. So to study journalism, I became a journalist. To understand kintsugi, I became a kintsugi artist. To understand true crime research, I became a true crime researcher. Taking this, I said, okay, why don't we democratize method research so that other people can immerse? Because people have an opinion on everything and their knowledge base can be next to zero. They don't understand the surroundings, the ecosystem. They don't have empathy. And I don't believe in sympathy. That's one step away from pity. That puts you on top of an artificial pecking order. Empathy is you riding the wavelengths of other people to understand them. It doesn't mean you excuse them. Empathy is not the same as justification or validation. You can completely disagree with a person's actions, but empathy makes you understand their train of thought. So here's a method for us where we could actually have people immerse themselves into real information with real world relevance. So it was a way for me to blend my love of true crime, narrative, or storytelling, or what I call flow, and technology. So we can take technology and we can do things with it we've never done before. So my goal was to make a new kind of immersive, ethical mystery documentary where people learn what happened, why, and how. So the turning point for me was understanding, first of all, that television is a bygone medium, but where it ultimately landed was a video gaming company. 'Cause I thought we need a way to show, because we have a lot of true crime shows, a lot of podcasts, and they're very interesting, and some of them are absolutely fantastic, and some of them are very mediocre, but there's still one-way form of communications, even with the comment section. You can interact so much with it, but you're not immersed in it. You're relying on information that has been cherry-picked. So somebody can have a little bit of footage of the body cam, some interviews, some articles, and you have to take their POV for granted. But if you're talking about a criminal act, there's more than one POV, obviously. You have witnesses, you have the perpetrator, you have victim or victims, you have all sorts of things from law enforcement to the families who were left behind. So there's some multiple things going on in any given moment. And the biggest problem with narrative is it only looks at one lens at a time. It doesn't allow you to look at things from different perspectives. This is why I prefer the word flow to narrative. Flow, well, here's a series of events that happened, like links in a chain. One, or you can talk about dominoes. One domino hits another domino, and there it goes. But sometimes dominoes can hit one, and then it goes into, if they fall in multiple directions. So you've seen a lot of people spend times with these elaborate dominoes. They hit one, and then all of a sudden you see about 5 or 6 rows of dominoes fall simultaneously. And that's a more realistic form of narrative. And I wanted a documentary series to be able to reflect that truthfully and accurately and empirically, but also emotionally. So my goals here were for a new kind of immersive ethical story, and in such a way where we can actually gain insights from the players. So while I was doing research on what AI could do, I was very actually impressed. The more I worked with AI, the more I realized this is a central component to what I'm doing. VR is another essential component, but that's another story for another day. AI is very good at looking at patterns, reflecting your thoughts. So you put in the certain thoughts, it reflects back to you, so you can look, you can vet, you can ask more questions, you can really get to understand the material with AI that you really, it's not like you can't get it from another person, but you have to have the right person who listens, who is attentive, who doesn't have an agenda, who's not trying to outdo you on a pecking order, and has that genuine interest. If they're just going through the motions, yeah, that's, I agree. Or they just agree because they're pleasers, it doesn't really work. So if you have an objective person who listens carefully, looks for information, asks questions, without editorializing, yeah, you can do that. That's the advantage of AI. So the more I worked at it and constructed the gaming concept and the scaffolding, the more I understood that AI is such a great tool for creative people, more so than most of what we've had over the last century. Creative people were kind of shut out unless they were writing stories, but then it got, or doing visuals, but then again, it got music, all that got watered down to a single word called content. So we don't talk about a writer or a musician, we talk about a content creator, which is very disrespectful. It's a term I have continued issues with. And I wanted to break that barrier. You're not just producing content. You're making a story, or you're making a collage, a song, You're doing other things, other acting. You're doing other things. It's not content. You're not stuffing a turkey with content. So when I started Clue IQ, I knew exactly where I wanted to go. And over the course of the weeks of this podcast, I'll describe them and talk about my experiences. So when I started this, I I wouldn't say struggling, but because it's so new and because I am a female tech founder, I found it very interesting how people talked to me or how they saw what I did. So I had to leverage my resources. I had to experiment with things, and there was so many challenges. Trying to hire somebody for coding was absolutely hilarious because I had this person recommended to me, graduate degree, and I explained, okay, I'm doing nonfiction in this format. And then he became alarmed. You can't do that. That cannot be done. I mean, he's talking down to me as if I were a naughty child who had some ridiculous idea that I could, flap my wings and fly. I said, yes, you can. You can do nonfiction in this format. No, you can't. It can't be done. It can't be done. Yes, it can. And I did it. So I said, okay, I don't really want to argue. So I did the coding myself. So for my first game, it was a 3-part series called Circle of the Frozen Mind. It was a fiction story, but based on a real life case I really wanted to do when I was working for A Time to Kill. And I couldn't do it for a variety of reasons. But long story short, it was a case in Maine where 2 gentlemen, both in their 80s, got into an altercation, and one killed the other, staged it, and took off. But he was caught. But there was a while of a lag because people could not believe an 80-something-year-old person would do that, which was ridiculous. So that was the first story I did in 3 parts. That will come out as an omnibus edition. So I did it in twine. Then the second one was a prototype of one of the series we're going to do called Victims Matter, where the focus is on the victim, understanding who this person was. Picking one case, I had to think about it. So I picked one from the 1920s, from that era, the jazz age, of the murder of an author and a gambler called Joseph B. Elwell. And his case has never been solved after all these decades. They've done mystery novels based on his murder, which I find interesting. So I said I'm going to do that one first because this case is just very intriguing. We're going to go back to it and make it a full-fledged game, but I did it in twine by myself. And then I am working now on another one, which is coming out in a couple of weeks. And it's another flagship series for this gaming company called Secrets Beyond the Grave. So I'll talk about that more in the coming weeks. So organizing, doing the pitch decks, budget, all this other stuff, I mean, it's a lot of work. And when you're starting, a lot of times people are intrigued, but they either look for things, flaws, so that you shouldn't be doing this because, it's nonfiction. Well, what would the families think? Well, first of all, we do old cases and John and Jane Doe's, and we can give a platform to people's victims' families that no other medium could ever have done before. And that's what they say. If they have a say in things, then there is no problem. We always think to knock new ideas down. And I said, no, I'm going to do this. I've done other things before. I'll talk about those later on, but long story short is I'm in it for the long haul. So what makes Clue IQ different? Well, it's live interactive true crime. So if you think of conventional games, they're mystery games that are based in fiction, or podcasts that only give you a little snippet of what happened in a certain way, and it's a one-way form of communication. You can't immerse yourself. You can't interact. So AI helps a player make decisions, think about various theories. They can do things that they haven't been able to do before. And number one, and most importantly, there's a commitment to victim-focused storytelling and real case nuances. So it's not, simplistic. You listen to how victims are portrayed, and they get totally made to sound alike. So if you listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and people have made jokes about this, when she walked in, she had a smile that lit up a room. You hear this so often. I'm sure the person was more than having a cheery smile. They had faults, they had strengths, They had likes, they had dislikes, they had a history, they went to school. We don't really know about this. Even if we say nice things about cannon fodder, at the end, that's all they are. They are the victim of the weak. We don't understand who they are. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about the person's saucy side. And yet that's who they were. I'm sure if a lot of victims heard how they were described, they would just retch. Like, I had fun. I went to parties. I did things. Yeah, I tweaked my nose at authority and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Why are you making me sound like a Pollyanna? And you can understand why people do that, because they live with regret. They might have gotten into a fight with the person the day they were killed or whatever. Now they're living with grief and regret. They're not allowing the person to be who they were to the public. And we don't understand these people. We can feel sad for their passing, but we don't really know who they were. And the assumption that, that the person has to be, can never have any salty language, never have had a bad day, is being very disrespectful. Yes, we have good sides, we have bad sides. And a lot of us, what makes it good? What makes it bad? This is where we tend to falter as a people. We don't let people be themselves. They can't be relaxed. Don't even let the dead be themselves. And I said, this is something I really want to deal with. We want nuance. Clue IQ is about understanding people. It's okay to have, a temper. It's okay to understand that we're not robots. We don't have to be. Why are we assuming that somebody's always dutiful and obedient is good? And a lot of times, people who get killed, they stood up for themselves or they stood up for other people, but you don't really get this. Even if they say it, you don't get a feel of what that means. So once you understand the victims from their point of view, things change. How we see crime changes. The motivation to want to solve a case changes because you can relate more to this person. More than you could have related to them if you just hear about their shiny smile. So I didn't want another true crime outlet that just kind of glosses over the victims. I wanted them to be front and center, a form of not just their biography, but what we actually lost when we lost this person. Things do not go on as they do before. When somebody dies of natural causes and they're 102 years old, we can still be sad, and we'll be very sad. This person we've known all our lives is gone, and sometimes that's the go-to person when you had a problem, or you had good news and you went and you've lost them, or you looked after them near the end, and now you have all this free time and you've lost your sense of purpose. So what did we lose when we lost this person? Everything stopped. And that's something I want to explore. And it's easier to explore this in an interactive, immersive environment than it is with a show or a podcast or a documentary. So over the coming weeks, I'm going to talk shop, add my own personal experiences doing this, because this is something I've done for years. And once I went into true crime, I went all in because it did change me. It changed who I am, how I think about things, and I'm very happy that it did. It's nice to be able to live more than one life. You go through different eras, and you go through a metamorphosis here and a metamorphosis there. We can think of it as a phoenix rising from the ashes, but then you have to crash and burn, and that doesn't always sound like fun, although you'd like to try it every once in a while. But a simple evolution, and sometimes it's more rapid than another. So that's all I have to say for myself today. Hope you enjoyed the talk. If you have questions or comments or feedback, I'd love to hear it. The second episode next week is about building a digital detective. So this is Alexandra Kitty, and I'll see you next week on the Clue IQ Chronicles. Bye for now.